This is the Anatomy Podcast. Cool. Ladies and gentlemen, it is currently the 5th of August, 5:06 p.m. to be more specific. And well, you know who this is. You know who I am. I'm Sean Cross. This is the Anatomy Podcast. And more specifically, this is going to be, I don't even know the episode number right now, just in case there are other episodes next week before this airs. But today we are doing another Anatomy Podcast session, to say the least, with none other than Adam Easterling of Tennessee local, Nashville and Columbia, specifically Tennessee local band Orthodox, which basically we are going to be learning everything there is to know about Mr. Adam here, his musical background, some of his upbringing, basically everything that he's willing to share with us on that note. And then we'll be digging under the skin of their upcoming album, which by the time this uploads, that is when the session is going to be released for, the sake of it being appropriate. But we will be digging under the skin of their brand new album, Learning to Dissolve, releasing through Century Media Records, which is fucking crazy to think about, that you guys are able to release your new album through such a big label, the same label as now Mental Cruelty, Lorna Shore, Of Sulfur, Suicide Silence, and plenty more. I think the list goes on and speaks for itself. But tonight, like I said, we're going to be learning his story. We're going to be digging under the skin of that record and probably talking about, his section, his part of what Orthodox is as a metalcore band, as a band that I would compare to Varials. And I mean, like in other bands, of course, like Boundaries, there's Varials, there's even Kublai Khan. I would say it's in the same musical vein to me as those bands, which is great. It's a great ballpark to be in. And we're just going to be learning a whole bunch of stuff tonight. So right off the bat, breaking it down to a more human level, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good, buddy. I just walked in the door of my house. I was out. I don't know how familiar you are with northern side of Nashville, but I was up in Hendersonville and I'm hanging with my mom for a little bit today. And literally you messaged me and I was like, oh shit, it's Friday. I have to go. And so I literally hopped in the car and walked in the door about 5 minutes ago. So I am good. I'm happy to be here.
Good. And I mean, in that case, I'm glad I gave you a message because I mean, Mr. Adam here not only is the vocalist, I'm sure the lyricist for Orthodox as well, but he also participates in the real estate field for Nashville, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Which, to be honest, I thought you were busy with that, but honestly, I completely understand. If my parents were living here in Tennessee, in like anywhere, even if they were in Knoxville, I would be taking that round trip every now and then because, I miss you guys. And I know my mom's at least going to be listening to this because she's starting to follow my podcast now.
I love that.
Oh, I'm so proud of you. I'm like,
Mama Cross. That's awesome.
Exactly. But shout out to her because she's been my biggest supporter. Obviously, because I'm a mama's boy. So.
Yeah, dude, it's funny. I literally turned my mom on. There's a podcast that they refer to me as their irregular regular. It's called New Breed.
Okay.
It's NU Breed. It's my buddies Tim Anderson and Jay Horsecow. They're up in the Northeast, and it's all new metal is their whole thing.
Sweet.
And I've been on there. When I started talking to her about it, I realized I don't know how many times I've been on that podcast. But she was like, I never knew you. She knows that I do. She keeps up with Orthodox she's a pretty big fan.
Yes.
But she doesn't know all of the podcast stuff that I do because she isn't on like any social media aside from Facebook. Yeah. I don't really post that much to Facebook.
Exactly.
So I was like, oh, here. And I showed her how to use, YouTube on her TV basically. And then was like, type this in. And there was like 8 episodes of me on there.
Wow.
And then literally like we're sitting there talking about how that whole thing works.
Right.
And then you messaged me and I was like, oh, speaking of which, I have to go right now because I totally spaced that it's Friday. I literally thought it was like Thursday up until I was you saying the whole real estate thing. I was literally doing showings and then I met some clients at a coffee shop down the road from her house. And then I was like, oh, I'm right by my mom. I'm going to go hang with her.
There you
that
go.
turned into like a 3-hour thing. And then you said are we good for 5? And my knee-jerk reaction is to always say, yep, just wrapped up my meetings or whatever.
Right.
It was not a meeting. I was hanging with my mom. Like, that's the immediate like professional response of like, let me sound like I was doing something like super important and you won't question it. And that was like what that was.
Yeah, that's definitely what I would do if I was in that situation. It just becomes habit after a long time. I'm sure it becomes muscle memory because speaking on behalf of our jobs, without spilling too much details, because I don't know how they would feel about, me spilling the details, but I work a call center from home, and basically I just read a script for a living, and I manage to convince people to go back to college. Some people are like, hey, fuck off. Like, I don't want to go back to school. And then I'm like, okay, so we'll put you on the do not call list. And they're like, don't fucking call back. And I'm like, nothing I can do. And then, they just hang up the phone, and I do that for 10 hours a day. And I was doing it most of last year too. And after certain circumstances that befell me, including losing the car that I was utilizing to drive to my in-person job for the first quarter of this year, really, after moving here, like I lost the car, and then hours started to decapitate themselves per se. Opportunities were flying out the door despite my efforts. It's like, when you realize your efforts and your work is not being appreciated on the level that you need it to be when you're 30, when you used to be 45 minutes away and you managed to break that down to maybe 33 minutes away. It's like, okay, got to get my priorities straight. And, I was just doing cart pushing for Costco. You know what I mean? It's a very bottom feeder job, and there's not really much you can expect unless if you've been slaving away at said job in person for like 3 years. And again, that's just the first step. It's like, oh, now you get it, somewhat better job, and now your efforts are somewhat more recognized. But nonetheless, it's like it was an opportunity that fell. Oops, smacked my mic. Poor thing. It was an opportunity that fell out from under, and now I've returned to this job, which is really nice, but it can get toxic really quickly.
It's
and
you're constantly getting fed negative energy from people that don't take the human factor into it. So
and I mean, shit, I don't blame them. Half the time I speak like a talk host. I talk like this. So they're like, this is a fucking robot. And then they hang up, and that's it.
Yeah.
And that happens like throughout most of the day because I'm so good at doing that. And some people even ask, they're like, yo, is this a live person? I'm like, yes, ma'am. Or yes, sir, it is. And, not that soft. I'm like, I make sure they understand what's going on. But anyways, enough talking about my job, because that's not what we're here to do. Instead, we are here to tell your story. So obviously you are the vocalist, you are the lyricist of Orthodox, which I'm sure has been around for most of this century now. I kind of get that impression. And like,
this century, no, it started in 2012. So it's just under half of the century so far, but over a decade. It's been a decade now. So
and that's funny because I was thinking 2011, but I didn't want to assume. So like I was
actually, so the band forms, the original 4 of us formed in the end of 2011.
Right.
Our first show was March 31st, 2012.
There you go. Yeah, that's awesome. But yeah, we're telling his story, obviously. And I also want to learn hella about your position and what you do in the real estate field, because by all means, here on the podcast, here on the Anatomy podcast, what I want my job to be by interviewing you and taking some of your time chunking out of the day is I want to learn and promote everything you do, not just a musician, not as a front man. That way we're not endorsing frontman syndrome here on the podcast, because that's not what I'm about. But, I want to learn like who you are and what you do, like what makes you get up in the morning, all that fun stuff, all the positive stuff, but also the tragedies that have befelled and like the obstacles throughout your life so far that have brought you to this point. So Mr. Easterling, if you would just go ahead and start from as early as you want, maybe 2012, or the very instant that you really got into music and decided that you wanted to eventually form Orthodox, whether it was 2 different names before, you get what I mean. You may take it away, sir.
Word. Yeah. I mean, so my family, as I was growing up, they were in the country music industry. So like I've always been surrounded by super talented creatives. be it my grandfather or my mom, my dad, my aunt, whomever. And in that, I was the one of my brother, one of three kids, and my brother and sister are 11 and 9 years older than me. So I was the one of the three of us that really took any kind of creative path in terms of our hobbies. So my brother was, I was super into sports. My brother really went into like rugby and such. And then he started studying business in college. My sister has done gymnastics her entire life. She opened up a gym and did all that kind of stuff. Then I, out of high school, I was playing in I played drums in, like everybody else in Middle Tennessee did around the time. I played drums in a Christian deathcore-ish band throughout high school. And then right as high school was ending, that band was no more. And I think at that point, I had already been in another band that was more like a straight kind of like hardcore band, really similar to like Trash Talk, so on and so forth. It was called Empathy.
Okay.
I played drums in that. We ended up going different ways at some point, and I had never sang for a band, but I'd always kind of like, that was like the coolest thing I saw at the time, being like, God, I don't know how old I was. It was like 17, 18. I always loved with hardcore music how much the crowd always ended up like singing along with everything and piling on. It was the coolest idea to me, because I've written lyrics my whole life. The idea of like somebody else knowing and singing my lyrics was like the coolest thing in the world to me. And so in that's kind of where I really wanted to start doing vocals for a band. And also I always really liked really crazy frontmen. So like the Christian deathcore band that I played in, we opened for this band called Thieves from Chicago once. And the dude literally like was busting his head wide open and drawing like an upside down cross with blood on his chest and like doing crazy shit. I've never taken it that far, but that was a moment where I was like, dude, this is so scary and intense. And that was like one of those moments that was really cool. And then I think down the line from there, I saw a band called Another Mistake from Louisville, and they played here. And it was like the first ever like hardcore band that I saw live where I really enjoyed it. And the singer of that band is actually, he now sings in that band Inclination. And his name's Tyler Short. He's a buddy of mine. And he is one of those dudes that like, that's where a lot of my initial like movement and banter and such came from, was like watching him and admiring him. And then I kind of brought that to Orthodox, and in 20, like I said, whatever it was, 2011, 2012, that was around the time that that started up, and we just kind of started writing music from there. And the band sounded completely different then than it does now. And like it's not even if you played this, the songs that we just put out like side by side to what we initially started with, you literally wouldn't believe it was the same. Well, I mean, it really isn't. It's just me from then. But yeah, that's where that went. First show was 2012. We released a demo, which you cannot find anywhere, and that is very deliberate. And then we put out another, it was like 10 songs. It's still an EP, is the length. It's under 20 minutes. It's called End of My Wit. I think that's on our Bandcamp. I don't remember if it is or isn't. I haven't looked in a very long time.
Right.
But we put that out in the middle of 2013. We went on tour for the first time in October of 2013, and have just been kind of hitting it hard ever since then. Members have changed pretty significantly since that time. I'm the only member from that group that's still doing it. But yeah, I mean, it's been a very long, challenging grind to this point, but this is kind of like finally the record where it seems like it's going to be paying off. So
yeah. And that's always nice, is when after such a long journey and a long legacy, all the blood, sweat, and tears that you yourself have poured into your music, that's what really bleeds through. And even when people get a physical copy, I like to think every now and then, like, they can feel the blood, sweat, and tears. They can hear the raw, unhinged emotion that is on these records. And I mean, I have yet to really dive into your last record, the last one from your previous record label. And I promise I did a little bit of research earlier, but like, you know, mainly for the sake of the session and stuff, it's like, okay, Orthodox, Tennessee, Century Media Records, Learning to Dissolve. Okay, get that cemented in your brain. But
Mhm.
I definitely wanted to take a step back because you were talking about bands in the Middle Tennessee hardcore scene that really kind of had an influence on you, kind of like, oh shit, I kind of really want to do this. What was the name of the band in which the frontman like bled and like drew a pentagram on his chest and shit? Because like I'm like, what the fuck?
That was Thieves. They were from Chicago.
Thieves. Okay, Thieves from Chicago. Okay.
Yeah, there was a band. I saw them again in a house, and it was the coolest thing. So there's this band from Nashville. It's kind of like the Nashville's best kept secret because they are truly one of the best live performers you'll ever see. They're called Cove.
Okay.
And they played this house show with Thieves, but they actually played where they set up in the living room facing each other, and essentially they play like one section of their set, and then Thieves would play a section, and they go back and forth. They had like a battle set of sorts.
That's
and
cool.
It was so cool.
That's unique too, because like it's really uniform these days. You don't really have an opportunity to bounce back and forth as far as a set. I've never actually heard of that before. That's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And that, you know, obviously for the people who were there for that show, it's like, whoa, these bands are trying to battle for a set. What is this? And the hardcore energy is just bouncing back and forth. It's like just two freaking stars about to collide and cause a supernova. Just the gravity, the intensity in the situation, the literal matter and the beings in the room are just like, whoa, and it's just getting crazier and more intense. Do you remember anything? Obviously there was the set bouncing back and forth, but do you remember like what was the craziest thing that happened that night, would you say?
Not really anything all that nuts, just because like they were so crammed in the room that really you couldn't stand in between them. Like it was not a big living room. Like it was just like we were crammed in the rooms beside it, just watching.
Right.
I think the funniest thing was the singer of Thieves said, "We're thieves. If you're holding a drink, I'm sorry." And then he ran and just like jumped into the people that were in the corner, basically. But aside from that was really the craziest part. It was just kind of captivating because like Cove has always been one of those bands that they're just a 3-piece, but they are able to just blow you away with how huge they can present themselves. And actually the End of My Wit EP that Orthodox recorded and released in 2013 was done with the guitarist of Cove in his basement. And but all that aside, it was just like a very interesting thing of like, they were like, yo, there's enough room. Why don't we both just set up here and we're just going to trade back and forth? And it was just, it was really cool.
Right. So I wanted to ask, as someone who's originally born and raised my first 22 years from Phoenix, Arizona, the Valley of the Sun, I wanted to ask someone who was born and raised in Music City, how complex and like how kind of widespread throughout Middle Tennessee and like the area of Tennessee that you knew and grew up with, like how much variety was there as far as like everybody knowing each other and just, you know, kind of the spread, the hold on Nashville that the hardcore scene had at the time, if that makes sense as a question.
In terms of the hardcore community, like Nashville was the hub that everyone ended up going to, but there was always pockets between Mount Juliet, Franklin, Hendersonville. There was always shows popping up in other cities. Usually it would be in somebody's church. They would always throw a show there. But
really,
that was a popular thing just because church venues were just open to letting people come in because they just wanted to get people in the door essentially. But so we had shows all over the place. There was a venue in Greenbrier. There was a venue in Columbia. There was a venue in Fayetteville. There was venues everywhere that would have these metalcore shows. And then Nashville was kind of like, you had a few people that would travel to all of them. I was one of them. Me and 15 other people probably went to shows everywhere. And then Nashville was where everybody came together. Right. So, I mean, you definitely, there was a big sense of community throughout where you would know whomever from wherever, but like, it's still very much a counterculture. It's still very much something that's not that familiar to most people. So
yeah. And being that like, sorry, being that Tennessee, I've always understood to be like one of the bigger like music cities / Bible Belt states, right?
Oh yeah.
I always get the impression that like, despite me coming out here thinking that it was so weird. I remember when we were first driving out here too, and I'm like, okay, it's green, it's like darker, it's southern, it kind of feels more primitive compared to Arizona, even though legitimately some towns in Arizona are the remaining atoms of the Wild West, and that mindset, just like that, let's see, fight for yourself, like, everybody's on their own type of thing. When I came out here, I totally thought, and I was mixed in between, there's going to be plenty more metalheads, plenty more like deathcore kids out here, or I'm going to get completely socially rejected because I am openly a Levian Satanist and an ossature, and I'm wanting to start a culty blackened deathcore band and all this other shit. So like coming out here, I'm like, which one is it? And so far, it seems to be B. Like, it seems to be B, at least compared to what I was expecting. And definitely there are so many various music scenes out here, whether metalcore for bands like Orthodox, or blackened deathcore for bands like formerly confront the elders, now of ruin. They're a band that's out here, and I mean there are plenty of others for sure. So like it's just interesting, I guess, kind of in general, getting used to the environment out here, which green, prettier, more animals, so much fucking colder than I ever thought it would get, but in the best of ways, because being born and raised in the Valley of the Sun, literally some of the hottest temperatures in the United States. So after this point,
we played Mesa in August. I get it.
Yeah, it's a nightmare. It is always a nightmare. But the cool thing is, it only takes you an hour going out of town to get to kind of cooler, quote. So that's always been nice. But I also wanted to kind of dive even further back with the commentary you have provided so far. And I was curious about you and your family's musical upbringing. You said your grandfather and most of the people in your family really have always had a little bit of music in them. So like from an early age, was your grandfather or anybody in your immediate family a contributor to your personal and current discography, or even the discography of the person you were when you were first starting Orthodox and participating in the other projects?
I mean, so my family, like I said, we're all in the country music industry. My grandfather moved here in I want to say he was in the 50s and 60s, and kind of like got his mark, made his mark there. My dad moved here in the 70s to work with, he actually moved here to build a studio with a friend of his. And then he eventually, around the time my mom and him met, he was the head of A&R for the country division of Atlantic Records. And then my mom and my grandfather ran a publishing company called API, which my dad eventually got fired from Atlantic because he wasn't going to fire somebody for that his boss was telling him to do it. And he was like, that guy doesn't need to go. That's ridiculous. And so they fired him instead,
damn.
Yeah, my dad's always been one to stand by his convictions, but in that he went to API, which is Affiliated Publishers Incorporated. They ended up signing a whole bunch of different people to their first publishing acts, from Kenny Chesney to Joe Diffie, Tim McGraw, Keith Urban, all sorts of different people. And that's where that got started. Now, in that, I always was around music, and my dad's always played guitar. He's always performed. And so he's actually currently, I just went to North Carolina. He lives in Chapel Hill, North Carolina now.
Oh, shit.
And he had his release show for his new record last Friday. So I flew out to North Carolina for a couple of days to go see that.
Right.
But he's like a folk Americana. Probably most comparable artist would be like James Taylor or something like that.
Cool.
So I've always grown up around performance,
Yes.
but none of it was anything remotely close to what I have played for my entire life.
Oh much. Yeah, of course. And like, nonetheless, it's like more coming from a mindset, that question of like just being surrounded by music in general. It's like, obviously you had bands like Thieves and Cove that you were seeing in the scene, but more or less it's like, I guess I was wondering if like seeing your dad and seeing your grandpa was also just oh yeah, I kind of want to do what they're doing. Like that looks really, really fun. You know what I mean?
There wasn't really ever a point when I saw them perform where I was like, oh, that looks awesome. I think they just always kind of pressed me to find an instrument that I wanted to play. And eventually, like I used to play, like the first thing I ever picked up was a mandolin, and I wasn't any very good at it. But what's good about mandolin is that you can use it as a percussive instrument when it comes to bluegrass. And so I figured out how to do that. Ooh. I would go with a buddy of mine to all these bluegrass festivals and just kind of play like chops through the mandolin at these bluegrass festivals. And but I never really studied it. I didn't really get any good at it. And eventually I kind of gave it up. But in that percussive sense, I decided I wanted to pick up the drums. I fell in love with Slipknot and Joey Jordison and how they had the arrangements with the different timpanis and things like that. And started playing all that on a practice pad. And then when I was 13, I think, my dad got me an Simmons SD 5K electric drum set. And I beat that until the sensor stopped working. And then from the next Christmas, he got me a real Gretsch starter kit. And I played with that thing for 10 years until I was older and ended up buying my own like nicer set. Yeah. But yeah, that was really, it was, I don't know that there was ever anything that they did that made me really want to be a performer so much as it was just like I ended up really enjoying heavy music, and I knew that they would support me going to any really any music, like any shows that I wanted to. What was funny is I went to, my first ever show was like a, what would you call it? Post-core weird, like post-core pop show thing for this local band here called Through a Glass. Okay. And like a band called the Hollywood Kills and the Pink Spiders and a bunch of bands that I've never seen again since. But it was like they came to my school and like I met them and it was cool. And there was like a mosh pit and all the shit was crazy. But like that was in December of 2007. Okay. I think. And then February 15th of the following year, Haste the Day, Scary Kids Scaring Kids, Drop Dead Gorgeous, Gwen Stacy, and As Hell Retreats were playing at Rocketown in Nashville. And I got my mom to let me go to that show. And ironically enough, she was like, yeah, you can go, but don't expect this to like become a thing. I was like, okay, yeah. And little, looking back, what are we now? 15 years later. Yeah. Not only is that like a thing in terms of me being a singer in a band, but like I run A&PM booking, which books the majority of the smaller hardcore shows in Nashville. So that's cool. It ended up becoming very much a thing. Very much a thing. I think kind of just over time of seeing those shows and how cool it was to watch people react to those artists is what drove me to want to play that kind of music. I was like, oh, I'd love to see what this looks like from the stage, basically. Yeah, and absolutely. That's where that kind of came from. And that's where I think that's more so where that started. Sweet. Yeah, that's awesome. And I mean, there we go. By me asking that, we see a little bit more earlier into your musical background and like other hardcore and like post-core, like all the fucking cores, all these other shows that you were seeing. So I think a great way to kind of cover that original commentary that you have provided so far, which thank you so much. It's been a real honor to have you on here, for one, and two, to learn as much as I can about not only a local Tennessee band, but a pretty big fucking local Tennessee band. Like it makes me feel comfortable. It makes me feel more at home here in Tennessee because I've only been here maybe a little over half a year now, which is crazy. Like how time has flown. This year has been a blink.
It has been a blink. It's me and my roommate agreed because of certain circumstances and like the obstacles that we've had to face. It's just been a fever dream, but it's been for me a really, really good fever dream. And I'm like, I don't want to wake up. I really don't. But I actually wanted to ask you then, speaking on behalf of your percussionary background, obviously you've gone and become quite a big, very intimidating, scary, even vocalist behind Orthodox. You know, you might be an average white dude, and you know, we're both pretty scrawny per se. You know, you got more tattoos, which is dope. But what ended up causing you to kind of drift away from becoming a drummer? Like what stopped you from maybe contributing or incorporating that into what Orthodox writes? Or behind the scenes, are you the guy who's also helping Orthodox write some of their drumming material? Like
I wrote pretty much every drum part up until this new record, and
Sweet.
I actually recorded everything up until the last record.
Sweet. Yeah. And
yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah. So, I mean, I never really stopped playing drums. I actually, when Orthodox was starting out, I also was playing drums for a like alt grunge rock band called Daisy Head. And they ended up moving on to becoming signed with No Sleep Records and doing a lot of really cool stuff. And we parted ways mainly because both bands were starting to gain traction at the same time. And they were like, hey, we don't want to make you pick one. So we're going to pick you. You clearly need to do this. Like, this is your thing.
Right.
And so in that was kind of like the last band. Actually, it wasn't. I also played drums in a metallic hardcore band from Indiana called Purgatory.
Okay.
And I played drums for them we released a record called Cold Side of Reality in 2018. Holy shit, that's 5 years old. No, that's 4 years old now. So we released that in 2018, and we toured a ton. I mean, in the year and a half I was with that band, between that and Orthodox, I was probably gone like 150 days, something like that. And Purgatory, that's the most ironic part of my creative career is like, I love those guys to death. Like Matt Anderson is not the most beloved person in the world.
Right.
But
okay.
I know for a fact that like, if I needed anything, he would find a way to get here for me in a day. Like, he's just that kind of person. And same goes for all those guys. Josh Mata, who actually lives in Arizona now.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if you're familiar with the band out there called Skin Ticket, but he's the singer for that.
Skin Ticket. No, unfortunately.
And, Brian Pilla, he played in a band back in the day called No Victory. He's the other guitarist. He's just a massive presence on the stage. But those guys, all that to say, like, their whole entire thing was they were all very obsessed with like the like original, like big, like hardcore bands like Biohazard and just bands like of that era, the much tougher, Northeastern, like Stigmata, bands like that were the true essence of what the original like hardcore bands were. That was what they were. And that's not only what they loved, like that style of music was not super popular at the time that I was playing with them.
Yes.
But in terms of like what hardcore is, that group of guys, like there's very few bands, and I can say this as being a touring hardcore band, is that there's very few bands that speak on violence as much as is spoken in hardcore that can actually back up what the fuck they're saying. And Purgatory was always one of those bands that like, you just didn't fuck with them. And I myself, I'm a very tough person.
Yeah.
I'm not a very hard person.
Right.
I'm not a scary person. And those dudes, that was what was the most ironic part, was like, those dudes had the reputation of like, yo, they'll literally fuck you up if there's a problem. And here I am in the back, like, oh, what's up, guys? Like, it was just a very ironic part, but I love those guys. And their last show is in November of this year.
Really?
And Matt started a new band with members. Basically, there was people from all over that were working cogs in the machine of Purgatory, and he was very similar to Orthodox, where Matt was the last original member, and he was just like getting to the point where it's like, man, I'm so exhausted with trying to arrange with people that live in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and Phoenix, Arizona, and all this different stuff. And he was like, I think we're finally gonna put it to rest.
Right.
And he started a band now that's awesome, absolutely badass. It's called Days Lost. Remember, I believe Brian from Purgatory is in it, as is Colin, and they're really sick too. So sweet. He's not done playing shows, but yeah, they're putting the pin in it, which is sad because I always love seeing them play. But yeah, that to get back to I go on tangents. I apologize.
No, you're good. It works out.
To get back to your original question in terms of drumming, that was like playing out and playing shows. That was my biggest contribution, was playing with Purgatory. So
right, of course. And with that being said, obviously you stated now that you have, up until learning to dissolve, have done most of the drumming parts for Orthodox and its records before. So that makes me think back to bands like Guerrilla Warfare, in which I'm pretty sure their singer is still their main vocalist is doing vocals and drums.
And playing drums, yeah.
Yeah, or you got Code Orange, in which their main vocalist used to do drums and do vocals at the same time. So I like it's an itching question. It's like, what was there a reason that you ended up at least up until this point, and this is just as far as I know with the band. So granted, haven't really watched any of the initial music videos or initial visualizers or initial live shows for Orthodox, but was there a point in time, if not recently with Learning to Dissolve or the last record, that you were doing both drums and vocals?
Never live. No, I couldn't do that. That's a separation in your brain that I've never even attempted.
Right.
I wrote, so the reason that I wrote a lot of the parts was, so the first record we released that was an LP was called Sounds of Loss. And that was written completely with me and Tyler Williams, who now plays guitar in Counterparts.
Oh, shit. Okay.
We literally, it was just me and him wrote the entire thing. I played drums, he played guitar, and we went down to Florida to our buddy Dan Colombo's spot. And I recorded it, and he recorded all the strings. We traded off on the vocal stuff, and that was just what that was. And the band was only me and him at that time. And we found members of what was then known as Hanging Moon. They're now known as Chamber. They filled in on the Sounds of Loss release tour, which ironically enough, we had to drop Tyler off at the airport to go play with Counterparts for Warped Tour. Okay. And that was when he was like, hey, they want me to join. I don't know if I can do both. I was like, dude, go be with the big band. Why the fuck would you? You're getting handed a golden ticket. Go take it. So that was the last shows that he played, was the Sounds of Lost tour. And at that point, it was literally just me and the band. I mean, we didn't have any other official members. And that was when I started like poking around and getting other people, like my buddy Taylor Stevenson, who was in Chamber originally as well. He started writing stuff with me. Dan Colombo, who did the Sounds of Lost record, actually moved to Nashville. And in that, we started writing the next record, which was Let It Take Its Course. And it got to a point where pretty much every song we wrote 2 songs that we actually wrote like in like playing. And that was the title track, Let It Take Its Course, which is the one that anybody's listening. It's the one that has the bell breakdown in the beginning. It's the coolest drum part that I'll never get to play live. But the other one was the opening track, Obscenity. And aside from that, everything else was written at Dan's computer with him playing guitar and me like humming riff ideas to him and then programming drums to it. And then around the end of that writing process is when Mike, our drummer now, officially joined the band, and Austin and Shiloh also joined, which is the guitarist and bassist. And so there's a couple of songs on Let It Take Its Course that Austin came in and wrote the guitars for. And I wrote the drum parts for, and I would leave them pretty open-ended because I wanted Mike to record the drums. And so he came in, and so the main skeleton of everything was written by me, and then Mike would go in and fill in the voids and recorded it. So
yeah, there you go. Cool. No, that's dope. And what's really crazy is more often now I seem to be landing interviews and interview opportunities with bands that I've actually seen live before. If I'm remembering this correctly, which I might not be, so try to keep up with me, I guess. I think the first time and the only time I've seen Orthodox so far, I think it was a body snatch. No. It wasn't a body snatcher tour. I think it was Spite. Did you guys?
Is it the laminate that's sitting behind you underneath that poster?
I don't think so. This one right here, that's Last 10 Seconds of Life. That's Enterprise Earth and Lorna Shore.
What's the little red thing that's hanging underneath it?
Oh, that's the laminate for that tour.
Oh, okay. It looks. Yeah. We did a tour with Spite. It was we did Root of All Evil tour.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's right. You guys were one of the bands who were there the night that we had fucking Nazis in the venue back in Arizona, Club Red. And
oh yeah, I heard about that.
That was, dude, that's crazy. Now, shout out to Tristan, man, because my buddy who came with me, basically he was in the pit and he thought they were joking. So he was doing Heil with them as they were doing Heil in the middle of a pit. He didn't know they were serious. And he was like, ha, 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 joking with them. And one of them fucking clocked him in the face, dude. Like, one of them just straight up jabbed him in the face. He disappeared for a little bit. And then everybody was like, oh, they're actually Nazis. Nazis, go home. And like everybody's cheering around the pit because we're not about that in metal. And I like, for those of you, I guess, who don't realize that, we're not about that here in the hardcore scene, in the beatdown scene, any fucking scene, period. It's not welcome. Hate on that level and organized hate on that level, at least, you know, it's not welcome. So eventually they were escorted out. But I remember these motherfuckers, they were just in the middle of the pit. And as people were cheering for their departure from the venue, they just have the biggest fucking like Cheshire cat smiles on their faces. One of them had no tattoos. He was shiny headed, but you can tell there was just hate and just like malignance per se, just oozing off of him. And then his buddy was not at all looking like a Nazi, but apparently they were, because they were just doing Heil in the pit. So eventually they were kicked out, but there we go. That's the connection. And it's cool to be finally hosting a band on my podcast and hosting the front man for the band. Because I think at the time you had like a buzzed head, right? Like you didn't have any hair. I don't remember.
Maybe not all the way buzzed, but yeah, I definitely did not have this much hair.
Right. And I remember I'm like, this band is pretty sick, but I'm like almost broke, so I can't buy any of the merch. And I was also thoroughly exhausted already from the show, but that's really cool to make that connection. So as we kind of wrap up the first half of the podcast, I think the last thing I want to kind of pluck and pick your brain on is 5 albums that you would recommend for my audience and anybody who listens to Orthodox who maybe hasn't decided to look into, you know, your top 5, what you listen to on your own time.
Are you talking metal specific?
No, it doesn't have to be metal. Basically just albums that you've just been enjoying recently, that you've been binging per se, front to back, as we say on Sean Cross.
Okay. So an album that's not already out yet, but I've had the privilege of hearing is the new I Am record. It's called Eternal Steel.
Oh, okay.
It's unbelievable. Let's see.
And when is that coming out?
September, early September. I forget what the actual date is, but early September.
Yeah. Yeah, September 9th. Yeah. So that
one's going to be incredible. I've been hearing that one for a long time just because of, you know, their singer Andrew sent it to me.
Cool.
And
that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, he's a good friend of mine and he sent it to me forever ago and I've been listening to it constantly. I literally had to stop because I was like, I'm going to hate this by the time it comes out. So I can honestly say that's going to be a pretty top contender for album of the year for me. Aside from that, I'm a very big like soul R&B guy.
Okay.
I would say probably a top 5 album of all time for me would be Fruedian by Daniel Caesar.
Okay.
Most influential record for me is probably Toxicity by System of a Down.
Hey, okay. Dope.
Aside from that, I mean, everyone listening to this has already listened to Toxicity and probably Iowa by Slipknot. But if you haven't, then what the fuck are you doing? I will implore, I've said this on other podcasts. A lot of people gave up on listening to Korn, but they're not this last record, but the one they put out called The Nothing.
The Nothing.
Is one of their best records. Literally one of the best records they ever put out. It's unbelievable.
I agree. Yeah, and it sucks because the record is so good to me only because of the lyrical content. Like, it was just really compelling, lyrically speaking.
It's really compelling, but
yeah,
it almost sounds like they took their initial, I don't know, they brought back a lot of groove elements that they hadn't used, and they brought back they didn't do the radio hit song format that they've kind of done for the past, which was why I kind of gave up on them. But this last one didn't do anything for me. The whatever it's called, the Breathing or Requiem. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. But it wasn't really my thing either.
The one before The Nothing was really good too.
The Serenity of Suffering.
Yes. That one was really good too.
Good album. Like, oh, dude. And like, there was a little period of time during that, because that's similar to that time, I think, is when what was it, the Great Chapter, Slipknot's The Great Chapter came out, and then there was also Rob Zombie's Acid Warlock Sex Orgy Machine or whatever. There was My Enemies and I, The Beast Inside. I don't know if you know them, but that's like one of my favorite bands of all time, and they are no longer a thing, which is so sad. And then Motionless in White was also dropping bangers at the time too. And I ended up culminating this collective playlist called The Horror Show, like the sons and daughters of the Horror Show. And like, when I think of those bands, I'm like, why hasn't there been just a massive, strictly Halloween themed music festival with all of these spooky bands playing? Because dude, you got a 9-person band who does nothing but wear masks. That's the joke. They make really good music too. You got Motionless in White, who does makeup and almost strictly Halloween themed releases. You got
it's kind of just not best.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. But like, I don't know. I guess the kid, the 15-year-old at the very least in me is like, but there aren't giant clowns dancing everywhere, so it's not enough, or whatever. But thinking back on it, that's kind of what I align Korn with too, and especially with the Serenity of Suffering. That whole album cover was just colorful. It was dark. It was spooky.
Very carnival horror feeling.
Exactly. And that's what I loved about it. I still have yet to do it, but I'm planning on doing because I do bass too. I play bass, but I'm planning on releasing soon, eventually, a Korn Rotting in Vain bass cover, because when I first learned to play that song, I loved it. It was such a great song. So we were making jokes about it. Let me pull it up. What was the song? On The Nothing, there's a song on it so Orthodox obviously has over time pulled a lot of influence from Korn. That's cool. The song Idiosyncrasy. Yes. So the joke we had, literally Idiosyncrasy, our like number 2 song on Spotify is called Panic. And Idiosyncrasy plays the main, like the chorus riff that we have in that, as their like opening riff, like almost note for note. And so I made the joke. I was like, oh look, Korn finally ripped us off for once. So like it obviously they didn't, but even if they did, I would not give a shit. A breakdown's a breakdown. But but that was like the main joke. Was I heard that and I was like, why does that sound so familiar? Oh my god. And it clicked. I was like, this is literally our riff. But that's dope. The last record to recommend in terms of like personal recommendations that I feel like everyone needs to hear would be Low Teens by Every Time I Die. Yes. Oh my god, dude, that's such a great record.
Literally like one of my all-time favorite bands. So
yeah, dude, that's awesome, because that was the album that really got me into them. And unfortunately, when they released this recent one, I forgot the name because they broke up. So I'm like, oh, I'm like,
it's called Radical.
Radical, right? Like after they broke up, I'm like, fuck.
Like Every Time I Die is one of the best bands that metalcore will ever have.
Yeah, I agree, dude. When I first saw them live, which was on the Aggressive tour for Beartooth 2016, and that's where I met Dead, which is a kind of big, like they're pretty big. I'm gonna correct that right now. They're a pretty big AZ local band, and they're basically trying to be the new Korn, but like with their most recent record, School of Thoughts, they kind of departed from that, which I'm like, but oh well. I met them there. I met Old Wounds, which
I love those guys. We've toured with them before.
Old Wounds is pretty dope.
Oh, I know what tour you're talking about. Yeah, that was Old Wounds, like last tour before Kevin quit for a minute.
Oh, Kevin quit Every Time I Die or Old Wounds?
No, Kevin, the singer of Old Wounds, quit to. He took a hiatus that kind of like he quit, and then he came back later on. But that was the last tour he did before he took that hiatus.
Interesting. Yeah.
Those are some buddies of ours.
Yeah, my roommate definitely found an attraction towards them when they were like, fuck Donald Trump, and he was doing all this like anti-Trump slogans and stuff. I'm like, oh, because at the time politically, I'm like, I know he's not a great guy, but I'd rather have him than someone else. And that, I had to be quiet about that because I feel like a lot of people,
didn't know what we were getting into at the time.
No, absolutely not. Yeah. And at this point, I'm like, I don't trust any of them. I'm very much an anti-government type of musician. I'm just all for that. So real quick, kind of recapping on the albums that you have provided, in which you did provide 6, which is really cool. We have I Am.
It's 6?
Yeah, the 6.
Right. Go on.
We got I Am, the new album, coming out this September on the 9th. We have Daniel Caesar. What was the name of that album?
Freudian. Like a Freudian slip.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with that word, but I'll improvise and look it up later.
It's Freudian.
Okay, yeah, cool. I was pretty close. We got System of a Down, Toxicity, which is a classic. And I also plan to do Aerials. I want to do a cover of Aerials once I get my band fully assembled. We're going to do a cover of that, and I think that'll be really cool because I've always wanted to cover that. There's Slipknot's Iowa, Korn's The Nothing, and Every Time I Die's Low Teens, which is badass. We will have all of those records down below in the description for you guys' listening pleasure. Just a little pluck from the mental discography of Mr. Adam Easterling. So, with the first half of the Anatomy podcast wrapped up, which again, thank you, Adam, for deciding to take the time, be here. After all, dude, you were hanging out with your mom, you were showing her shit, and you were like, wait a minute, I gotta go. Like, if I were in the same spot, I'd probably be like, but I'm hanging out with my mom, man. Like, you gotta spend time with her. So like, I appreciate you stopping by and deciding to take the time to be with, in this interview on the Anatomy podcast. It's really cool. So as we migrate into the second half of the Anatomy podcast, which I'm pretty sure it's already been an hour or so, which is crazy. We kind of dig into Adam's contributions, Adam's fraction of the narrative for Orthodox. Now, being the original member from the initial lineup of the band, and the primary lyricist, the guy who used to write all of the drum parts up until now, I wanted to ask you where the name Orthodox came from.
So Orthodox has always been a straight edge band. And the actual term Orthodox outside of any kind of religious context means a belief that many claim to follow, but few know their true meaning of. And so being a straight edge band, that kind of it fit really well and it sounded metal. So we went with that.
Yeah, no, it's sick.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, pretty easy, but I mean, it's also a pretty intelligent word. So like, that's awesome. That's awesome. And it's actually a lot more than other bands prior have had to offer. Cause most of the time it's like, well, grievances or like Misery, Shrine, the random names that people come up with. Even Worm Shepherd, who is one of the biggest and closest bands that we still hold dear on this podcast, of course, with Druid House. I mean, Worm Shepherd was absolutely improvised, and it was like, just give me a list of cool names, and I'm just gonna pluck one from there, because Devin to Embers cannot be the name forever. We're not exactly a Rob Zombie band where I'm writing everything, or I just happen to be, the creative process is different naturally. So it's really cool that Orthodox, it kind of just defines to its definition. It's confined, that's a better word, to its definition. So as the story of Orthodox has progressed up to this moment, are there any other narratives that you can offer behind the name itself? Like, Orthodox is true to its definition, but also It's like we write what we want, raw, that type of thing. Has there been any other narrative kind of developments since the beginning of this project?
I mean, not anything that has to do with the name. The name was kind of just like that's just where you start, really. And if any band, we named it when I was 20 years old. So actually, when I was 19, even. So like, it was just it fit at the time, and it's just continued to fit. And I think that the ironic part of it is, we are a very weird band in the sense of how metalcore, the genre of metalcore and hardcore align.
Yes.
So the whole joke that's constant on like the Century Media YouTube links, like, oh, what an unorthodox band. And I'm like, yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
that's what brings you in. But I don't know that there's any particular narratives outside of you saying the whole, like, we write what we want thing. Like, that is very true. We literally we have always kind of no matter who the member was, we always we would always pride ourselves on taking risks musically and inspirationally, pulling from inspirations that are common in ways that are not common, playing things in ways that you wouldn't usually hear delivered in that way, so on and so forth. So it's I don't know that there's any other narrative aside from the original reason behind the meaning, but aside from that, that's really about it.
Yeah, of course. And so since 2012, really, the beginning of Orthodox's journey began. You guys were probably releasing independently, having help from friends around the Nashville, Tennessee music community in general. So you had Unbeaten Records that you were signed to prior to your Century Media Records signing. Were there any record labels before that you guys were signed to, or were those only two so far?
I mean, really, signed is such an odd word for it. Like, we were with what was called Clear Minded Records that then became Hyperview Records, which was just our buddy Caden. He lived out in California, and he just really liked the band. I think I met him on Tumblr or something like that. And he was like, yo, I would love to like help you guys put out like cassette tapes and shit like that. And that was really it for the most part. We kind of he would help us he would press and send us cassettes for free pretty much. And we got the first recordings for End of My Wit. I think we paid Brian $300, something like that. And, it really was just like people who liked us, like the band believed in us and took risks on us. And then, so that was what carried us up until, we were on tour with Left Behind, Lurid AD, and Incited. Okay. And Left Behind had already signed with Unbeaten Records, and Buddy Armstrong came to our show in Albany and saw us, and then hit us up like the following month. We were on tour. Actually, no, he hit us up, I think, beforehand or the week after, whatever, and was like, yo, love the band, really see a lot of potential. And he wanted to sign us on for an LP. And had he not done that, I don't think we would still be a band. We were kind of reaching a point where none of us really were super into the songs we were writing. Like, they were fun to play live because they got reactions, but we didn't really give a shit about it. And all the stuff that we played up before our first LP was all very metallic hardcore. Like, I compare our early stuff as like Foundation if they played music fast. And the first EP was that. The second EP, it's a little weirder. It was like it's called Give Me a Reason, and it was like similar sound, but we just had like a little bit more of a groovier element that kind of sounded a little more new metal, a little more slammy. Right. And then we did a split with a death metal band from Michigan called Breaking Wheel. Okay. And we ended up writing like two like straight up hardcore songs that were just like metallic hardcore stuff. And after that, we were kind of like, okay, what direction do we want to do for the next thing? Do we want to release something else? We were like, I don't know that I want to do anything else. We weren't really like happy. And then Unbeaten was like, we want an LP. We want to put out an LP for you guys. And I was like,
cool.
Sure, I guess.
Yeah.
And so Tyler and I ended up writing a song, which was the second to last song on the LP. It's called The Approach.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like the first thing we wrote. We were like, this is really cool. This is where we want to go. Tyler and I both grew up nu metal heads. And so that was what we wrote. We wanted to write, which was like super weird, nu metal-esque stuff that was before it was like kind of sprinkled, but there's like very deliberate hardcore, metallic hardcore with very deliberate nu metal influence.
Yeah.
And I remember calling Buddy and being like, hey, just a heads up, this doesn't sound anything like the band you signed.
Huh?
And he was like, oh, it's like, yeah, I trust you. And that record was our catalyst. So Unbeaten Records putting a risk in us there is like legitimately the only reason this band is still alive.
Yeah, that's cool. And so with Unbeaten Records, you had that initial LP that they wanted from you. And I take it that Let It Take Its Course was the final release that you would do through them. So I guess kind of scratching the surface, because I would love to dig under the skin of that record later in time when you have the opportunity. But when it came to Let It Take Its Course, what were like the more defining elements for that record compared to the initial and now, Learning to Dissolve?
In regards to what makes it different is because it was written by, the first record was written by me and Tyler, Tyler Williams, who is a phenomenal guitarist and has a really crazy creative mind. He would never say that himself, but he is a significantly talented person with a very interesting perspective on songwriting. Yeah. And the second record was just me and Dan. Dan wasn't ever really a member. He just wanted to help me write it because we knew that we needed to write something. And so I would go to him with song ideas and hum him riffs, and he would show me what could be done. But that record was, the majority of it was not written by a guitar player. It was written by me in here that he would then transpose.
Right. Interesting.
And that's like the key element. And that's kind of why I think that's probably the weaker of our three records, is because though there are some songs on there that are really good, all the really good songs were written by guitarists. So Obscenity, Look at Me, Let It Take Its Course, I Can Show You God, all those songs were the ones that actually had a guitarist contribution, be it Taylor Stevenson or Austin Evans. Right. And then everything else was just me. So that's really the defining component. And then Learning to Dissolve. So the first thing we put out with Century Media was a single called Body and Soul. Yes. We put that out last October. We basically just put that out because we were about to go on tour with the Acacia Strain. And we were like, we need to put something out because Let It Take Its Course came out February 6th or 7th of 2020. And so you know what happened about 4 weeks later was the world shut down. So that record fell flat on its face. And none of us really felt that passionate about those songs. We're like, we want to make sure that when we come out with this, we have some sort of buzz around new music. We want it to be known we're on Century Media Records, and we don't want to just announce that we're on the label and be like, we're on a new label, see you eventually. So we actually signed with Century Media Records in 2020, in the summer of 2020. Yes. And we straight up didn't say anything about it to anybody until Body and Soul came out in October of 2021. Right. So that was our like big announcement thing, was here's this new music video, new song, new label. We're on tour for 6 weeks with Acacia Strain, Kublai Khan, and Dying Wish. And that was the first thing that came out. And that was like the first song that was a complete equal parts contribution between like me, Mike, Shiloh, and Austin all wrote on that song. That's good. And that's what was kind of like our whole thing was, that's the first piece. The rest is coming. And Learning to Dissolve is the first record that was all four of us crammed in the room with Austin on his computer writing stuff for months. That's and then that's the key component, is this is the first one that's coming from all of our minds, not just one of ours.
which is always great. And I've noticed in the past, bands like Cane Hill or Silent Planet, even Slipknot, when everybody's working together, like, you know, just any band in general, but those are just bands I love that I'm naming off. When everybody works together, naturally, it just, that's how it operates. When it's only a couple people from the band being like, okay, we want this done, this done, this done, and we need a guitarist to throw in a riff. They're like, okay, you know, it's different. It's different when you're not really a part of the creative process. But I'm sure when everybody comes together, it feels more like a band releasing an album as a band, which is always nice. So
Yeah.
with that in mind, we now dig into what I think will be the coolest thing to happen to this podcast, is digging under the skin lyrically, track by track, of a record that hasn't even fucking released yet. This album will be coming out August 19th, plenty after we even upload this Anatomy podcast session. But basically, all I want from you is to give us a back of the book summary according to the title, and then like little bits and pieces, or just, you know, everything that you want to tell us about each of these tracks lyrically speaking. You may take it away, sir.
So learning to dissolve as a concept is essentially just, it's all based around the idea of growing up and realizing what time does to your perception, to your body, to your moral compass, to your belief, to your passions, to everything. So the song Dissolve essentially says everything that you grew to love was wrong, and then eventually says sorrow never fades, revealing time kills everything, and we're just learning to dissolve. And that's kind of just like, that's the quick synopsis, is time kills everything. Okay. And cool. That is pretty much the easy summary of what everything, though there's not, like, the previous two records had a lot of like song to song had carrying thematic, and some riffs repeated themselves even record to record, and this one doesn't have any of that shit. It's really just like, that is the overwhelming thing that I wrote about, was just kind of realizing that I'm an adult singing in a metal band that hasn't really hit it big by any means. And I'm just kind of like looking around at how much has changed, and I mean, especially in all of our lives in the last 2 years, but since I started this, and like what my life would look like if I hadn't, and so on and so forth. And that's like the synopsis. So
it's a terrible realization, but even I'm facing that, like working a job from home again, which I didn't think I'd ever be doing, or trying to get a band together and like only a couple steps away from actually getting music out. It's all a realization, and it has its positive perspective, but there's also the negative perspective of like, you know, I'm going to invest, and there's ultimately a chance that none of it will ever amount to anything except for me getting music out into the world in the first place and telling my story and expressing my pain. Because by all means, I'm trying to, me personally, I'm trying to write music from a very, very raw, heart on my sleeve perspective. I think that's just the best way to write music. But for some people, it's like, no, I just want to write about zombies, fucking Frankenstein and stuff, and that's Rob Zombie. Like, but by all means, sir, let's go ahead and continue with this under the skin session. I'm excited because some of this music I haven't even heard yet. Some of this music, the world in this moment at 6:14 p.m. on August 5th, they haven't heard about it. So just basically provide us the best way lyrically that you can describe track by track what learning to dissolve is, starting with numero uno.
So number one song is called, or track one is called Feel It Linger. Initially that was a song where like I wasn't finding the right thing to say. I couldn't really figure it out. And it kind of just became a metaphoric story based on the idea that your shadow is actually a representation of your darker half, basically, that's hiding from the light. And that's why it's always right behind you. So it's, you know, the only God you've ever known is just talking about like this thing that is constantly there. No matter where you go, there is always a shadow. So the idea that your shadow eventually comes to life and kills you is like in it being a metaphor for depression, essentially.
Okay.
Depression, anxiety, stress, all that kind of stuff. So the only God you've ever known watches you from the corners of your home is like the last lyric of it. But I think like the last chorus before the big ending, ceremonial breakdown at the end, whatever, says, do you really think that we're alone, standing in a shadow of our own, spirits dwelling in the night, waiting to hunt us in the light? It's essentially just saying, like, you can't see them unless it's daylight. They're not around unless there's a light to be hiding from. So
Yeah,
that's kind of where the whole idea of it is that, like, no matter how bright something is, there's always a dark part of you that's right behind you. So.
Which is awesome. Yeah. And it's again, connecting to the main title, learning to dissolve. That's a very real thing that some people probably have in the back of their mind, and learning to dissolve will kind of bring that back, and they're like, oh shit, yeah, you're right. But it's a matter of balance, man. Like, it's a matter of balance and perspective and just keeping positive. So I like that. But yeah, let's continue keeping it rolling. Track number 2, Mr. Easterling.
So Head on a Spike was actually the first single that we released from this record. This one is kind of just like me coming to a realization of like where this band has actually already gotten, the achievements that we've had, regardless of like the lack of opportunity that we've gotten from being pushed by whomever. Mm-hmm. And a lot of our success has strictly just come from who we are and how we push and how we work. And so over that time, we've had a lot of people that like don't even bother to listen to us because maybe they saw us when we weren't that good, or they think that the whole idea of being a new metal-esque band is dumb. And so this is kind of just like a fuck you to anybody that's ever doubted us, because it's only gotten better.
Left you behind. Yeah. Okay. No, it's sick. And Head on a Spike. When I think of that track, I get a very opposite vibe. Like, I almost get vibes of animalistic, just fuck you. And I mean, I guess that works out in the end. But also there's the duality of, but we have had opportunities. So it's like, we are doing well. We're proud of it. We're moving forward. And whoever doubted us, like, go fuck yourself. And I mean, it's a very real thing.
When you look around it, the kind of shows we've gotten to play, the fact that we're on a legitimately major label in the heavy world, and we finally are finding a really good team around us, and so on and so forth. It's just, that's kind of like the whole thing of like, a lot of people would have said to me, oh, I would have quit by now, I would have stopped doing it. Well, that's like the whole point, is the big line before the ender is, when it becomes my time, I'd like to see you try and take me alive. It's just like people ask me how much longer I think this band will go, and I'm like, I don't know. I have no fucking idea. I don't care.
I don't care. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You got to keep moving forward, or you're going to get caught in that mindset, and then you will get stuck, I'm sure. And it's a very, very bad thing to be stuck in, but that's awesome. And I love that very sick song that I had the opportunity to react to. And really, it was the first time me and you ended up talking. I'm like, hey, I want you on my podcast, man, please. But jumping forward, we have track number 3, which thankfully on iTunes, even though the album isn't out yet, I can see the album track list, because on the store, I'm like, oh, where is it? But but Cave In, what do we got going on with this, man?
So Cave In is kind of written about creative insecurities, and how, especially nowadays, like when you're first starting out and you're all really grinding with your friends, and like you're playing with bands that are better than the crowd they're playing to, and you're all playing to 15 people a night, 30 people, sometimes you get 50 to 100, and you're like, oh my God. Mm-hmm. That's like a really cool like camaraderie that you build with a lot of people. And
yes,
but what happens is, as you all begin to grow, your friends and you all start getting different opportunities and growing up more and more, and then they'll get more attention, and this pops off and so on. I mean, like a prime example, first time we ever played Arizona was Knocked Loose's first headliner in 2015. And it was in the Nile Underground. And
damn, man, I remember
those are some good friends of mine. And it's like hard for me to put into perspective what we are doing and what we've done when I look at people who've been doing it around the same time as us, like them, and they're like taking over the fucking world. Mm-hmm. So the whole thing of Cave In is idea that like you're constantly taking what you've built and you're comparing it to somebody else's building.
Yeah.
And it's like it's a very, like, I always want to celebrate my friends as much as I can, but it's kind of hard to not be envious at times of like the success other people have, basically.
Right. Which is, yeah, that's perfectly natural. It's normal. And like, I think I have yet to experience anything like that, but I'm sure eventually I will, because there are plenty of bands I know who are already rising to number 22 on iTunes for new albums and shit. And I'm like, wow, like that's crazy. When do I get to do that? Like it's and that's the terrible. I think that's early on, before I even start a band per se, just like hypothetically speaking. That is probably the worst thing about the music machine, is just being in that mindset and being in that headspace of, oh yeah, I know all these people, but they're doing so much better than me. Raw, you know, it's a natural thing to happen. But as long as you can keep the human emotion in it, when you need to, and then, you know, when it comes to business is business. Sometimes bands shoot off, sometimes they sink under, sometimes bands break up. I was gonna have a band on my podcast a little bit ago, an AZ local, which I will not say the name of for that case, but they might be looking to break up soon. And I'm like, fuck, because they were doing pretty well, and they made their name in the scene and enough people knew them. And I'm like, well, shit. But the thing is, at the end of the day, some people, they get overwhelmed by their own craft, or they have a new fork in the road that they want to take. So naturally, not all bands are going to survive, but there are millions more where that came from. Like that's kind of the eternal music machine, but that's a dope concept. Track 4, we have Become Divine, which is, I like that title. I really do.
That one is kind of just written under in the perspective of humanity being like somebody, I guess it's written from the perspective as if modern humanity and the counterculture we're all in is like a cult, and it's welcoming somebody into the cult. But the issue with it is that how quickly we're all willing to just turn on somebody at the word of someone above us in status, basically. And that's kind of where that's coming from. And it's written from like the weird, like the song is almost kind of like happy, the chorus is upbeat and so on and so forth, but like it's very much supposed to be like that eerie, like when you see a video of like a big church, everyone's happy and dancing, but you like know the energy that's actually there, and it's very eerie. Like that's kind of the delivery that we were going for with it. And I guess the idea of it is that like the main lyric, it says the ritual has just begun, so now bear the mark or run. It's basically saying like there's so many instances nowadays, especially, that if you don't fall in line, you just get left behind. So.
You get left behind. Yeah. And speaking briefly on religion, coming out here, I've noticed that there are a lot more churches, and there are a lot more neighborhood local churches, which as a LaVeyan Satanist and an Ossature, very, very intimidating. And then you take it to the next step. And for the first time in my life, I'm seeing publicly physical in-person Freemason lodges, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with the culture behind that, but very, very scary shit when you like dig into it, when you find out the history, the legacy that even our country was basically built on. I mean,
we played Mason lodges before.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
Yeah, it's weird.
Is it weird? Is it like very uncomfortable? Or
I mean, it really just looks like a community rec center, and they just open it up to rent it so they can make money and pay the rent. But yeah, it is odd to think about the other things that take place. So
yeah, or at least the things that take place in like bigger lodges and bigger mansions and castles. Because I know when I was working at Costco, we had plenty of Masons come in, and just like seeing that sigil on the back of some of the pickup trucks was like, stay the fuck away from them, or I'd like give it a nice little birdie, because I'm like, no, like fuck Freemasons. But yeah, it's very important, and it's like, again, very relevant, at least to me, very applicable to me. So that's cool. Track 5, we have Digging Through Glass, which like just thinking of that sensation makes my skin crawl personally. So what the fuck is going on, man?
That one is mainly just about the idea of what if one day all this music stuff ends, and I regret having done it because of how many different things I've had to sacrifice throughout my entire 20s have been dedicated to this band. So it's like, did I waste the prime of my life to go for something that may not amount to anything one day?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what that's saying. I mean, that song to me has the biggest like chorus and most emotional impact of the entire record. It says just some things are made to be pushed away, and it's kind of talking about just like, what if this was all meant to be, it's something that is meant to come to an end, which obviously it is, but where will it end? How will it end? So on and so forth are questions you can't even possibly begin to know. So
only questions that a musician or an artist well into the craft would know and be asking themselves, which I regret. I dread the day that I'm starting to think that. But immediately, which is also a really cool track, we have number 6, Nothing to See, which I kind of get like a passive aggressive, like fuck off, leave me alone type of vibe with this one.
This one's more so written from a perspective of how we as a society nowadays, everything is so, every tragic event is shoved in our face, and then we're expected to get over it and brace for the next one within a week's time. It was like the first verse specifically is written about Nashville as a city, and how on Christmas Day of 2020, a literal bomb went off in downtown. And on 2nd Avenue, somebody had a literal car bomb that they built, and they had a siren that was saying, evacuate, a bomb will explode, and so on and so forth, evacuate now, so on. So it's fucking terrifying stuff. And and all the while, it was what was the song that was being played? It was I think her name's Petulia Clark. Yeah, Petulia Clark's song Downtown was being played the entire time as well. It's very, very eerie. Goes off, nobody dies aside from the guy that's in the van. His van was parked right next to the main lodging for the AT&T like digital mainframe. And it blew out all AT&T cell service for an entire day.
Shit.
And it being Christmas Day and so on, it was very eerie. And in true Nashville fashion, within 3 days' time, they had blocked it off with school buses, and Broadway was just business as usual. So it was kind of just like dude, you couldn't shut it down. You couldn't find a way to just like pay respect to the fact that like that entire block was just obliterated. People's homes were obliterated, and luckily nobody died, because the guy, his goal was not death. He was making a political statement about 5G or some bullshit like that. But but that's kind of what the opening is about, where it says I know the meaning of your intent, neglecting the pace while you play pretends. I'd look away, but my patience is fucking spent. It's just talking about like, you're saying all these things while you mean all of these things, and neglecting the pace, meaning like we need a little more time, and nobody is ever willing to give it to us before. I mean, Wes, in terms of willing to give it to us, like nobody can stop tragedy. It just happens.
Yeah,
but
it just happens.
It's such a constant thing, and that's kind of what the song is about. And there's another line later on that says, violence bred out of heat, tragedy with no room to grieve. There's nothing to see. There's nothing to see. There's nothing to see.
Yeah, nothing to see, because tragedy is such a regular thing. Like that's basically the epiphany, the back of the book summary for the news these days. Is like, you turn on the news and sooner or later you'll hear about someone who murdered their kids, or not to be too intense, but had sexual actions with their kids or something like that. Just really, really ugly shit. And it's the reason I don't watch the news anymore. That, and every news channel ever usually is provided a script, and they all say the same exact thing. And I'm like, I'm done with it, man. I'm done. I would rather watch a 20-minute video about Star Wars related news or Marvel related news before I even watch news about the real world, because it's usually nothing but tragedy. People are just nasty to each other. So I get that completely. And that's a really solid track. That's a really solid lyrical standpoint. And that's why I do this type of shit, is because I love when bands and artists and lyricists like have this level of depth and integrity, just soul to what they're writing, because that's what it's all about for me. But moving on from track 6, we got track 7, which is 11762. What is this? Is a code for something, man? Like I can
So
I can
when you hear the album, that is very much like a weird industrial song, and it was written entirely by the producer Randy LeBeau. And I just told him, I was like, hey, I want a song on here that sounds like, I just wanted to sound terrifying.
Okay.
And the song itself is actually all a metaphor for writer's block. And basically the idea behind it is like I'll stop knocking when you let me in. It's just talking about like the constant like beating my head against the wall kind of thing of like, can you please just can my brain just give me something to work with here? And the number is 11762 is the code, or was the code, to get into the studio.
Oh, okay. Yeah, definitely was. Don't try to break it.
Well, it's not even there anymore, but
yeah, exactly.
They moved to a new place, but that was the door code. So if you ever want to go to Belleville, New Jersey, and steal a mattress from the dickhead mattress company that took over it, you can try that code at the door and see what happens.
There you go. Well, track 8, we have Dissolve, which that's been one of my favorite tracks off of the album thus far, but I'm sure I'm gonna love the rest. What do we got going on here, man? Oh wait, that's right. Being that this is the back of the book summary and kind of contributing to that back of the book, it's like growing up, you just learn that you're dissolving with time, and whether it be your religious beliefs or anything else, really, you're just dissolving. You're learning to dissolve, which is sick. And it's a very real concept, again, which affects all of us, whether creatively or non-creatively speaking. So is there any other commentary you would want to add for Dissolve?
Not really anything in particular. This one's it just, when I knew that I wanted like the opening line to be that we're all just learning to dissolve, I was like, that's a really cool opening for this. But I had to realize like, fuck, I'm going to say that, then I have to figure out how to incorporate the overall theme into this. And luckily the chorus just kind of tells it. So
yeah, that's dope. Well, track 9, we have Fast Asleep. What do we got going on with this?
Fast Asleep is what's the best way to describe this one? It's basically the idea of your traumas coming back to you in your dream. I'm trying to remember how I described it best when I was talking with a buddy of mine, and it was like it's basically like the idea of trauma from the perspective of trauma speaking to its victim, trying to convince them to revisit the experience so that it can come back to life.
Right. Okay. And I mean, that makes enough sense. So that's solid as fuck. I like that. And I mean, that's been happening to me recently as well. Just like kind of reflecting back on not even just traumas, but like very irritating things that have happened in my earlier life. It just, sometimes it comes back to haunt you. So sick. So number 10, we have All That I Am. What do we got going on with this?
This song is kind of about like basically just being the fear of already having hit your ceiling, wondering if like, is this all I'm ever going to be? Is this all that I'll ever become?
Yeah.
Are these vices of mine always going to be around? Am I always going to make these same mistakes? Am I always going to think this way? Am I always going to feel this way? Is this all the success I'm ever going to have? Like, what if this is all that I am? Is like one of the last lines of the song, but it's kind of just it's one of the darker, more, I'd say, self deprivating. Deprivating. I almost said deprecating. I don't think that's a word. Defecating is a word. It's not self-defecating, but it's self-deprivating songs on the record, just because I was we were like almost a month into the studio, and I think it was like a record, one of the records for the hottest months ever in New Jersey.
Oh, okay.
And the studio itself was in the top of a warehouse, and there was barely any air conditioning. I just felt fucking cooked, and my voice was blown out at this point, and I was still working for my previous job during the day on my computer. So I was just like, wheels were never stopping. And I just felt absolutely burnt. And this was one of the last songs we had. And I just one day, like the one of the breakdowns that hits, I was like, oh, that'd be really cool to just repeat the soft, faint second week is like the over and over and over and over again. I was like, oh, that'd be sick to just repeat that. And then I took that and used it, ran with that. And then this one lyrically is probably my favorite, lyrically my favorite on the record. It's very metaphoric. But it's easy to comprehend, and it's very dark. So yeah, I think the all encapsulating lyric would be the trying to fit where I don't belong. If I make a sound, I make it wrong. What if this is all that I am?
Sick. No, it's awesome. And speaking creatively, I'm sure I'm with you on that. That was basically every day working from home on a very simple job, working in AZ. It's like, even on the bottom floor, man, when you have shitty AC, it's like you're just dying. You're just like melting in your seat. It's so gross. But with that being said, we have the final track 11 on Learning to Dissolve, which is Voice in the Choir. What do we got going on here, man?
Voice in the Choir is basically just preparing for, this is one of the nods that I have to our original record, which is Sounds of Loss, which is the entire thing is a concept based around anticipated grief. And this one's kind of like the same thing, just the idea that like one day somebody that you hold incredibly close to you is going to pass. Yeah. And there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah. And that's a very painful thing. I know, I'm pretty sure soon here, my family over in AZ, we're probably going to be facing a loss here pretty soon. Dementia is a bitch. I hate it. But that being said, we wrap up then the Under the Skin session for the upcoming August 19th full-length record from Orthodox, Learning to Dissolve, their debut record, their debut full-length through Century Media Records. And I mean, that kind of like wraps up most of it, really, which honestly, one of the coolest sessions I think I've had to date. And I've said that a lot, but I think it's just because I love working with musicians. I love talking with musicians, talking everything there could be said, saying everything there could be said about music and lyrical content, all that fun stuff. So I think the last question I would have for you before we kind of depart for the night, I guess, is what is the thing you're like, I don't know, what is the thing you're most anticipating for the rest of the year? Because I mean, obviously you guys got the CD release show, which one of those dates is going to be here at the End venue in Nashville, which I'm going to do my damnest to attend because I would love to see you guys live, especially with the context of this session. That'd be really cool. And then you guys are going on this massive tour with Varials, Boundaries, Dr. Acula, and other projects. Like, well, what do you like? Obviously, you're probably hyped for all of it, but like, what are you most looking forward to within the next couple months, really?
I'm honestly, in terms of what I'm looking forward to, I'm just ready to get this thing out. It's just been, we recorded it August of last year, and it's been pretty unbelievably stressful trying to get everything in line for it to come out when it needed to, so on and so forth. And also just the actual being my role in the band is handling pretty much all of the media side of it and the social media and all that stuff is just very exhausting to be constantly rolling stuff. And so I'm excited to just get this out for that, but also because I know that this is the best record we've ever done by a landslide.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited to get it out and see how it's received, but also I'm excited to see what opportunities it brings us. So that's kind of the Burials tour is going to be an absolute blast because we've already toured with Burials once and we love those guys.
Mm-hmm.
Boundaries are some of our best friends, genuinely. And then the 3 music videos we did with the singer of Distinguisher who's opening, and they are all, we hung out with them semi recently as well. I booked them in Nashville, and all amazing dudes. So like I'm super excited for that tour because it's basically just gonna be a month of everyone who's already close friends just playing out crazy shows. Yeah,
hanging out, bouncing around the country. I'm sure that's going to be great. And I mean, as I begin the first chapters of my band, I just await the opportunities that could possibly happen. I dream of all the bands I would love to tour with. I guess that would be a question too, just for the sake of picking your brain on that. Obviously you got these amazing tours you've been on over the last 4 years since the band has started. What would be a band that you dream of touring with someday that you haven't yet?
The actual dream would be, any of the big 3 between Korn, System of a Down, Slipknot, any of that stuff would be amazing. But I mean, in terms of bands that are genuinely realistic that we haven't really had the opportunity for, I would love to get to actually tour with Harm's Way. They were supposed to do the Acacia Strain dates and we didn't. They ended up having other stuff come up and they couldn't do it. That would be amazing.
Right.
I'd love to get to do some shows with Comeback Kid. That's like my all-time favorite hardcore band. I think that would be a blast. I would love to do some legitimate metal tours, get out with bands like one that's been, I know this is another big dream sequence, but Dave Grohl's metal project Dream Widow is fucking amazing.
Right.
And things like that. I just, that's kind of where I'm at, is I'm so open to tour with just about anybody that I don't really have all too much bias in terms of where we go. I just as long as there's people there to see it, I don't really care.
Exactly. And as long as you have the opportunity in the first place, just keep moving forward. I like the mindset. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that will about wrap up our session. It is currently 6:42 p.m. August 5th. We had an awesome time here sitting down and talking with Adam Easterling of Orthodox. Their new album, Learning to Dissolve, comes out August 19th. And if I remember correctly, we will be releasing this. We are permitted to release this next Friday or next Saturday, right? Or are we releasing it the weekend of the album? Just so we're kind of...
I have no clue when you are releasing this.
Right.
That is between you and them. I have just...
That's very true,
the initial email,
Right, of course. Well, in that case, people, thank you for stopping by. And please let me know down below if you want me to look into hosting the rest of the lineup of Orthodox. After all, pretty killer local band we got here, making fucking moves in the scene, being, as of last August, signed to Century Media Records, cranking this upcoming record. I think that about does it. And again, thank you for stopping by and spending what I think is almost 2.5 hours of your day after hanging out with your mom to be here.
Happy to do it, man. I'm glad you had me on.
Hell yeah, man. Well, you be sure to have a great night, and people stay tuned because at least on the 13th, we will be debuting and helping Null Existence debut a new era and their new vocalist. Otherwise, yeah, we'll see you guys next time. Thank you for stopping by.